Jack Sullivan thought he had outpaced the noise of his past. The badge was gone, the years of service long behind him, and with them the daily battles against crime and chaos. But what remained was harder to bury. The sharp edges of memory, the gnawing weight of his post-traumatic stress. Nights that should have been silent cracked open with echoes of gunfire. Days that should have passed peacefully were instead sliced by flashes of panic. Still, he had clung to the belief that an old cedar cabin on the banks of Montana's Clearwater River could soothe those open wounds. The cabin was his grandfather's legacy, weathered but sturdy, filled with the faint smell of pine sap, fishing oil, and old wood smoke. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. He liked to think of it that way. Quiet water, strong timber beams, the faithful companionship of Shadow. His German Shepherd was more than a dog. He was history. Once a canine officer trained to the highest edge of discipline, Shadow had plunged headlong into danger by Jack's side for years, chasing suspects through back streets, cornering men who thought they could outrun justice, standing firm against fires, standoffs, and bullets. Now, off the force and 6 years old, his devotion hadn't dimmed. He lay at Jack's boots with the quiet solemnity of a soldier still on duty. On this particular afternoon, the forest glowed like burnished copper. The town of Mountain Hollow, just a speck beyond the trees, dozed in its own rhythm. Smoke curled thinly from the chimneys of distant cabins, carrying whispers of dinners already simmering and families huddled against the autumn chill. Overhead, geese traced ragged wings through amber skies, their calls rising and falling like a chant. Below, the Clearwater spilled across stone banks with a steady, liquid hush, as if reciting to itself the secrets of every lifetime it had witnessed. Jack stood on his dock, the old wood creaking underneath him. A fishing rod rested in his grip, the reel humming as the line cut across the water. He had been there for hours, patient, silent, layering cast upon cast, not so much to catch trout but to buy reprieve from that nervous twitch in his left hand. Patience, he told himself, the mantra quiet. Each cast was a kind of prayer. For a little while, it worked. The forest was still, the river flickered, even his pulse slowed, until Shadow shifted. The dog's ears snapped forward, nostrils quivering as the forest fell into sudden focus through his senses. In one sharp motion, the shepherd pushed up from his chest, hackles rising like arrows along his spine. He released a low growl, faint, deliberate, but thick with warning. Jack straightened, voice low and steady. "What is it, partner?" But Shadow wasn't listening. He bounded off the dock, claws clattering, and tore through the damp earth toward the river's edge. His tail stiffened like a rod as he pawed violently at the roots of a fallen pine that sprawled half into the current. He barked, fierce and guttural. Jack reeled in quickly, heart clutched by instincts that came back like muscle memory. Boots crunching into mud, he hurried over. "Shadow," he called, breath shortening. Each nerve hummed with alertness, like the old days of standoffs and raids. The shepherd's muzzle pressed toward the water. Beneath slick leaves and knotted roots, Jack spotted a shape catching the run of water. His eyes strained, uncertain at first. A dark outline, a curve. Then there was no mistaking it. A shoe. The sight punched air from his chest. He dropped to a crouch, tugged on his worn leather gloves, and leaned dangerously into the current. Cold water gripped his arm, dragging, but his hand locked fast. Shadow barked high, frantic, as if urging, "Now! Pull!" With one hard wrench, Jack yanked the object free. The water frothed and spat mud. He lifted it up, dark leather, large size, almost new, and across its edge, a maroon stain, dried but still unmistakable. Blood. The world tilted. Years dissolved. He was somewhere else. Winter air burning against his face. Echo of gunshots cracking like ice splitting. He smelt cordite, the sharp chemical bite. His hand trembled, grip faltering, and fragments of fear flooded back. Then Shadow pressed against him. Steady, solid, warm. The dog's amber eyes locked on his master as if to say, "Stay here." Right here. Jack grounded himself in the moment. Cold air, river light gleaming orange. Breathing deep. He nodded slowly, whispering hoarsely, "Good boy." He turned the shoe over, still dripping, its laces neatly tied, as if its owner had only stepped lightly from his door yesterday. But such a shoe had no good reason to be locked in the roots of this river, and Jack knew something had shifted. By dark, his truck rattled over the winding road into Mountain Hollow, Shadow riding at attention in the cab. On the seat between them sat the shoe, sealed in an evidence bag. A reminder. Life's storms always break their way back in. Jack's thoughts swirled around a name. Nathan Pierce. Swallowed by the Clearwater 3 months ago. Outdoorsman and businessman, mid-40s, sharp jaw, sharper reputation. Jack could still picture him. not as a survivor of Montana wilderness, but as a man attempting to purchase it, parcel by parcel, eager to trade profits for credibility. Some had admired his talk of preservation, others dismissed him as a player. But one immutable memory lingered. Pierce had last been seen stepping into his fishing skiff, wearing those very leather shoes. Jack parked outside the sheriff's office, its brick blood orange in the fading neon glow of a flickering sign. Inside, the smell of old coffee, ink, and gun oil wrapped around him. He hadn't walked beneath this roof in months. It felt both familiar and too close to home. At her desk sat Sheriff Elena Moore. Tall, braided hair pulled back with streaks of early gray, the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. Her hazel eyes snapped upward when the door sighed open, and for a brief second the years rolled back. "Jack Sullivan," she said with a measured tone that softened at his name. "Been a while." "Evening, Sheriff," Jack answered, voice rough. He lifted the evidence bag. "Got something you'll want to see." Shadow curled loyally at his boots as Jack sat. He slid the bag across. Elena raised her brows, slipped on gloves, then turned the shoe slowly under the light. A long breath. "This looks like the pair Nathan Pierce wore in the photo we put out," she murmured. She tugged a glossy print from a file. Nathan on the dock, a trout in hand, those very shoes tied neat and clean. The instant the photo touched wood, Shadow's whole body stiffened. His head dropped low, nostrils flaring, and a growl rumbled deep. Jack steadied him. "Easy, Shadow." Elena eyed that reaction carefully. "Your dog's reacting?" "Yeah," Jack said. "Picked up the scent at the river, too." She leaned back, folding her arms, gaze sharpening. "We dragged that stretch twice. Had divers. Weeks of work. Nothing came up but cans." Jack's shrug was tired, almost resigned. "Storms loosen what you thought was hidden. Sometimes it surfaces later." Elena spread a topographic map across her desk, pen tapping at the marked west bank. "We swept this area thoroughly. That's where his boat was last spotted." Jack's eyes tracked the map. "What about the east bank?" Elena hesitated. "That's federal land. Dense, tangled, off-trail, and—" She studied the map carefully. Old settlements, cabins, some of them not recorded officially. Jack looked up, eyes steady now. "You mean somebody could be living out there, hidden, off the books?" Her expression hardened. "Wouldn't be the first time," she said. "Trappers, squatters, folks hiding from warrants, but nothing tied to Nathan so far." Shadow wedged softly, eyes fixed on the map. Jack crouched beside him, letting the dog sniff the photo of Nathan. Shadow's tail gave a stiff wag. Then he turned to the door, looking back at Jack as though urging him on. Jack straightened. "He's keyed on something." Elena studied the dog. "You still working him like a K9? Jack shook his head. "We're both retired, but he never lost the nose." Elena gave a small impressed nod. "I'll run this shoe for DNA. Maybe we'll get a hit on Nathan or someone else. But don't go playing detective again, Jack. Last time you did, you wound up in the hospital." Jack almost smiled but didn't. "I'm not playing. I just want to know why my dog found that shoe." Elena sighed. "Fair enough. Let me pull the case file." She opened a filing cabinet and produced a thick folder. The cover bore Nathan Pierce's name and date of birth. She handed it over to Jack. "Here's the public portion. Don't take it home, but you can look while you're here." Jack flipped through photographs of search parties, sonar scans of the riverbed, and witness statements. A younger deputy named Kyle Patterson came over with 2 mugs of coffee. Kyle, early 20s with sandy hair and an eager smile, wore the standard khaki uniform. He'd grown up in Mountain Hollow and still had that small-town earnestness. "Evening, Mr. Sullivan," he said. "Heard you caught a real one back in the day." Jack gave a curt nod. "Evening." Kyle set the coffee down and moved off to another desk, leaving Jack and Elena to their quiet. Jack focused on the folder. Every page whispered of dead ends. And yet, his gut said Nathan hadn't just wandered off. He'd found something he shouldn't have. Shadow's head lifted suddenly, nostrils flaring at the scent of the shoe again. He gave a sharp bark that startled Kyle across the room. Jack laid a hand on the dog's neck, steadying him. Lena arched an eyebrow. "Guess your partner smells blood." "Literally," Jack met her eyes. "He's telling us something's off." Elena saheed and pinched the bridge of her nose. "All right, here's what I'll do. I'll have the lab rush this. You meanwhile keep your eyes open. If you see anything else, another clue, a boat fragment, whatever, you call me before you step foot across that river." "Got it." Jack stood, slipping the folder back to her. "Got it." He picked up the evidence bag. Shadow rose to his feet, still tense, but quiet now, as if satisfied some kind of message had been delivered. Jack scratched behind his ear. "Good boy, let's go." As they stepped out of the sheriff's office, The first stars had pricked through the Montana sky. The wind carried the smell of pine and wood smoke, and the hum of insects rose from the roadside ditch. Jack felt the shoe's weight in his hand, heavier than leather alone. Somewhere out there, across the river, answers waited. He glanced at Shadow. The dog's eyes gleamed in the starlight, bright with purpose. "Tomorrow," Jack muttered. "We'll go see." Morning descended gently on Mountain Hollow beneath a thin veil of mist. The Clearwater River flowed silently under gray skies, its current slow but steady, like a quiet warning. Jack Sullivan stood at the edge of the dock behind his cabin, hands buried deep in the pockets of his flannel-lined jacket, his breath misting in the chilled air. Shadow, the German shepherd, sat alert beside him, ears perked, nose raised as if reading the wind. The previous day's discovery, the blood-stained shoe, the unsettling weight of Nathan Pierce's name had sat like a stone in Jack's chest all night. He hadn't slept. Shadow hadn't rested either, pacing the wooden floors, pausing often by the door. Now, as Themis lifted just enough to reveal the far edge of the riverbank, the dog rose to his feet with purpose, trotting toward the narrow path that led to the upstream shallows. Jack followed without speaking, his boots crunching on gravel. At the water's edge of the river stretched no wider than 15 ft, stones jutting from the surface like half-scanned memories. Shadow stepped in first, moving carefully through the slow current. Jack tightened the straps of his waterproof boots and followed. The water was icy, wrapping around his calves, pulling at his balance with quiet insistence. They emerged on the far bank into a stand of dead birch trees. It took only a moment for Jack to spot it. The cabin, low and half swallowed by trees built of weathered logs that had turned nearly black with time. Its windows were covered with tarps nailed down with strips of corrugated metal, the door reinforced with a thick plank across its front. Nothing about it looked welcoming. Shadow sniffed the ground near the foundation, then lifted his head and growled low in his throat. Jack stepped closer, keeping his body low, his eyes scanning the clearing. Mounted under the corner of the roof was a small makeshift security camera wired with a battery pack and wrapped in duct tape. Its red light blinked steadily in the fog. Jack crouched behind a tree observing. The structure was no abandoned relic. Though old, it bore signs of recent use. The footprints pressed deep into the mud, the broken ferns at the edge of the clearing, the faint smell of antiseptic carried by the wind. He moved quietly along the edge of the cabin. On one side stood a rack where steel animal traps hung drying some coney bear. Some foot snares cleaned and oiled, not legal this time of year. The scent of gun oil hung close to the wall, sharp and metallic. Shadow halted near a side window, nose close to the ground. Jack followed, glancing through a small crack in the tarp. Inside was dim, but he could make out a cot, a folded sleeping bag, a small table with radio equipment, and shelves lined with canned goods. In the corner stood a stack of plastic bins labeled in black marker with strange codes. Behind the cabin, a rough path had been worn into the undergrowth, leading deeper into the forest. Jack's eyes followed its direction briefly, then returned to the cabin itself. Above the back wall, another wire led from the roof into the trees, likely another antenna disguised among the branches. He took out his phone and began capturing quick photos. The traps, the camera, the door, the trail. Each image was a new thread to pull, a story waiting to unfold. Near the foundation, Shadow's nose stiffened again. The dog paused by a rusted vent, then sneezed. The faint smell of bleach drifted upward, mixed with something heavier animal blood. Jack couldn't be sure, but it was fresh. The wind shifted again, curling through the clearing, lifting the edge of one tarp just enough for Jack to glimpse a black duffel bag inside the cabin, and what appeared to be a bolt-action rifle propped in the corner. He didn't linger. Shadow circled once more, quiet and sharp-eyed. He stopped near the front of the cabin and looked up at Jack. Jack gave a small nod. They had seen enough. The mist thickened slightly around them as they stepped back toward the treeline, the river out of sight beyond the underbrush. The red light on the camera still blinked behind them, watching. The fog had thickened again by mid-morning, wrapping around the forest like gauze. Jack Sullivan crouched near the base of the old cabin's wall, boots sunk halfway into the damp earth. The details he'd observed outside trap racks, improvised antennas, the blinking camera, all pointed to one thing. This was no forgotten shelter. It was operational, active, and likely tied to something bigger. Shadow stood motionless beside him, ears twitching, every muscle alert. Jack made his way to the front door, testing the knob gently. As expected, it was secured tight with a rusted padlock and a plank nailed across the inside. But to the left of the door, one of the boards covering a window had loosened, the nails warped with age. With careful pressure, Jack pried it outward just enough to slip through. Inside, the air was sharp with the sterile bite of cleaning agents, oil and mildew. The light filtered dimly through the tarp-covered window, painting the interior in dull gray-blue. The space was compact but organized. Along the far wall stood a folding table with a tangled mess of radio equipment, battery packs, signal meters, and a small transmitter. A hand-drawn map of the surrounding forest was pinned to the wall above it, covered in scribbled notes and several marked X's. Each X aligned with known game trails, and one was circled in red close to the spot where Nathan Pierce had launched his skiff before vanishing. To the right of the table were wire cages stacked 2 or 3 high. They were animal traps designed for live capture. A few still had tufts of fur clinging to the metal. Nearby leaned steel-jawed traps and a bolt cutter with fresh oil still glistening along its hinge. Along another wall stood storage bins with codes written in black marker B12M3P9. Jack opened one. Inside were animal tags, some state-issued, others counterfeit. At the bottom of the bin, under a layer of burlap, lay 3 small license plates from ATV. S scratched, dirty, and clearly stolen. Shadow sniffed his way through the room with care. His nose stopped at a dark corner where a piece of plywood had been placed flat against the floor. Dust brushed aside recently. The dog gave a soft whine, then a short bark. Jack stepped over, crouched, and ran his fingers along the edge of the board. It shifted slightly. He wedged his knife under the board and pried it up with slow, steady pressure. The board groaned, then lifted free, revealing a square crawl space beneath the cabin floor. The smell intensified earth, rust, and something sharper. Inside the hollow, partially wrapped in a tarp, was a hunting knife. Its blade was stained with something dark, blood-dried and flaking. Nearby was a leather roll containing forged IDs and driver's licenses. Some matching photos of men Jack didn't recognize, but one showed Nathan Pierce. Same eyes, same jawline, but under a different name. A red sticker marked the corner of the fake ID. Stamped onto the leather folder that held them were faint initials. CB Jack felt the shift in his gut, the sick twist of old instincts reawakening. This wasn't just poaching. It was trafficking, identity fraud, and possible homicide. And this cabin, it was the center. Whoever lived here had been watching, tracking, and covering their trail well. He took several photos with his phone, angles of the map, the knife, the IDs, each one a nail in a larger structure he didn't yet understand. Shadow remained by the edge of the hatch, unmoving, eyes fixed on the darkness beneath the floor. The dog's breathing was slow but focused, as if waiting for a sound only he could hear. Jack carefully placed the floorboard back into its slot, covering the hidden contents again for now. He didn't want to risk disturbing anything further, not until law enforcement could process it properly. He moved back towards the radio equipment, scanning for signs of recent use. A logbook sat open on the table, the latest entry dated just 3 days earlier. Short codes, frequencies, and a list of incoming supplies. One word appeared multiple times, circled in pen. Transit. Behind the cot in the corner was a steel lockbox. Jack tested the lid, locked tight, but a sticker on the side read 2022 in smudged ink. He took a photo and left it untouched. At the base of one support beam, scrolled in charcoal or dirt, were a few words written in rough script. Pierce, watch 7 days. The number 7 was scratched deep again and again, as if someone had waited for something or someone. Jack stepped back, letting the weight of it all settle in. Cages, illegal traps, fake documents, a hidden knife. This was the kind of place that didn't exist by accident. It was part of a network, one that extended beyond the trees and rivers of Mountain Hollow. And Nathan Pierce, whether by chance or intent, had gotten too close. Shadow moved back toward the window, pausing briefly to sniff the bins once more before standing watch. Jack followed, glancing one last time at the map. The red circle near the river trail, the hand-drawn arrows through state forest, the dotted lines leading toward the mountain pass. Routes, smuggling paths maybe, or escape routes. He slipped back out through the warped board the same way he came in, careful to reset the window as it had been. Outside the light had shifted slightly, still cloudy, but brighter now. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp metal. Shadow moved quietly along the perimeter, pausing once near the trap rack before continuing. Jack didn't speak. The silence was thick enough to keep them both listening. He didn't know when the cabin's occupant would return, or if they were already watching from somewhere deeper in the trees. But what he'd found inside was more than suspicion. It was proof. By the time the morning fog began to lift over Mountain Hollow, Sheriff Elena Moore was already behind her desk at the modest sheriff's substation. A 2-story brick building that had seen better days, tucked between a pharmacy and a diner. The smell of old coffee and pine-scented cleaner lingered in the air. Elena leaned forward, scanning the open case files sprawled before her. At 38, Elena carried the sharp focus of someone who had spent years fighting to be taken seriously in a maladministrated department. With her ash-brown hair tied back in a non-nonsense bun, and her tan sheriff's jacket still damp from an early patrol, she traced her gloved fingers over a set of boot-print photographs. Her eyes narrowed as she compared them to the measurements Jack Sullivan had provided the day before. The boot treads from the blood-stained shoe Jack found matched the pattern she'd documented from an unsolved illegal poaching site 2 months ago. That site had been deep in the forest, miles from the main road, and left little behind besides trampled brush and a shattered trail camera. At the time, she'd chalked it up to an opportunistic hunter. But now it felt different. Next to the prints sat a manila folder labeled Carter Briggs, Active Warrant. Elena opened it slowly. A mug shot stared back at her. A lean man in his late 40s, face weathered by years outdoors, a faded military tattoo peeking out from under his collar. Briggs was a known poacher, with a long history of arrests in 3 states, wanted for illegal animal trafficking and assaulting a federal wildlife officer. His last known location was flagged as northern Idaho, but one tip had mentioned off-grid property near the Montana border. That was 6 weeks ago. Now it all pointed to the same wilderness Jack lived next to. Elena stood up and crossed the room to the pinned topographic map on the corkboard. She'd spent weeks trying to piece together activity patterns from scattered reports. Missing hikers, disturbed traps, stolen equipment, but it had always been too loose, too disconnected. With a red marker, she circled the spot where Jack had found the shoe. Then she added another circle where an anonymous local hunter had once spotted a strange flicker of light in the woods weeks ago. And then, based on Jack's description, she added a third, the location of the hidden cabin. All 3 formed a rough triangle. At the center of it sat nothing but dense forest and riverbank. The door creaked open, and Jack entered, Shadow at his side. The dog's coat was still damp from the trail, his eyes alert, nose twitching as he scanned the office. Jack, still dressed in a dark thermal jacket and hiking boots, looked tired but focused. "Elena," Jack said, giving a slight nod. "I brought something." He reached into his pack and pulled out a series of photos he'd taken inside the cabin. The hunting knife, the forged documents, the animal cages, all of it. Elena flipped through them slowly, her expression turning grim. "I think this place is being used for more than just trapping," Jack said. "There's a logbook with radio codes, notes about transit, and someone was definitely tracking Nathan Pierce." At the name, Elena exhaled sharply. Nathan was a friendly guy. He kept to himself, but everyone knew him at the bait shop. Used to bring my deputies coffee when they were checking licenses on the dock. Jack set the last photo down, the one of the forged ID with Nathan's likeness. Shadow gave a soft growl as the paper shifted. Lena moved to her file cabinet, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a slim red folder. She opened it, revealing a black and white surveillance photo clipped to the front. It was grainy, but showed Carter Briggs walking through a parking lot, his jacket heavy and eyes down. She slid the image toward Jack. "Recognize him?" "No," Jack said, "but Shadow might." She laid the photo on the floor. Shadow stepped closer, sniffed, and let out a low, sharp bark. His hackles rose for a moment, then fell. Jack raised a brow. "That's the first time he's reacted like that since we were in the cabin." Elena folded her arms. "That might confirm it then. We had intel that Briggs was hiding out somewhere north of the river. The boots you found match the pattern from a poaching site. If that shoe is his and he's tied to the cabin, then Nathan might have seen something he wasn't supposed to," Jack finished. Elena nodded, then grabbed a roll of updated topographical maps. She unrolled one onto the table and pointed to the marks Jack had mentioned. "These paths here off-trail along narrow ridge lines. These aren't commonly used, but they're perfect for someone who doesn't want Toby found." She circled a point. "There's an abandoned fire lookout up on Sawmill Ridge. It hasn't been staffed in over 10 years, but it gives a perfect view of the whole valley, including that cabin. You think he's using it as a watch point?" Jack asked if he's smart. "Yes. And Briggs has always been careful. Never stays long, never leaves fingerprints, never uses the same route twice. But people like him slip up when they feel untouchable." Jack studied the map, tracing a line from the cabin to the ridge. "This could explain how he was able to track Nathan without being seen. And how he's avoiding us now," Elena added. Shadow sat quietly beside the table, but his ears twitched again at the photo. He gave a short huff, the same sound he made when he caught a scent near the hidden hatch. "That's the scent from the crawl space," Jack said. "It's the same." Elena looked over the photo again. "Then we've got enough to connect Briggs to the site, at least circumstantially. I'll need to send someone out to verify. But if you're willing, I'd like you to guide them." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do it, but we have to move fast. That cabin's not going to stay empty forever." Elena slid the folder back into the cabinet, eyes heavy with determination. Let's bring him down before someone else disappears. The forest lay in near silence under the cloak of night. A waning moon hung low behind the tall pine ridges, casting faint silver light across the banks of the Clearwater River. Jack Sullivan, clad in a dark canvas jacket, his breath visible in the cold air, crouched just beyond the tree. Shadow, his loyal German shepherd, stood beside him, ears forward, every muscle taut with anticipation. Earlier that afternoon, Jack had reviewed the topographic sketch Elena gave him. It matched the ridges, trails, and streams he'd memorized since moving here. But there was something else now. Intuition. That whisper honed from years on the force. It drew him back to Thederelict cabin, this time under the cover of night. No flashlight, no phone, just moonlight and memory. He and Shadow crossed the shallows where the river narrowed into a stream choked with algae and pebbles slick with moss. The water was cold and biting even through his boots, but they moved swiftly. Reaching the opposite bank, Shadow stopped. His nose lifted slightly, nostrils flaring, and he let out a low, nearly inaudible growl. Jack followed his gaze toward the cabin's outline darker than the dark around it. Still, silent, but not abandoned, they moved closer. Shadow led with measured steps, avoiding dry branches and brittle leaves. As they approached the rear of the cabin, Shadow stiffened and lowered his body. Jack mirrored the motion, lowering behind a cluster of brambles. That's when the scent hit him subtle at first, but then unmistakable. Gasoline. Shadow's hackles lifted slightly. He sniffed toward the trapdoor they discovered in daylight. Jack knelt beside it, his gloved hand touching the edges. There was a new residue, an oily film that caught the moonlight. He brought his hand to his nose. Chloroform Shadow suddenly shifted his weight and let out 2 soft huffs, their practiced signal. Jack froze. Then he heard it. The distant whine of a motor approaching from the east, tires crunching over dry pine needles. Not a truck, not a car, an ATV. He darted toward the shadows behind a stack of rusted metal cages. Shadow followed silently, tail low. They crouched together, every sense alert. Breath held. The ATV rolled to a stop just beyond the clearing. Its engine cut abruptly, a figure dismounted. Jack caught only glimpses. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a hunting jacket wearing a beanie and thick boots, hemoved with confidence like he'd done this 1,000 times. In one hand, he carried a duffel bag. In the other, a flashlight with red lens tape, military style. He didn't sweep it around. He didn't need to. The man paused near the trap door. He bent slightly, sniffed the air, then knelt and touched the edges, checking for disturbance. Carter Briggs, it had to be. Briggs turned toward the cabin and unlocked the front door. From the way he moved, he knew the layout by heart. The duffel disappeared inside with him. The red light flickered across the inside walls, revealing the edge of a wire rack and part of a metal table. Jack leaned closer to Shadow. "Stay low," he whispered. The dog didn't move. Eyes locked on the door, then almost casually, Shadow stepped back, sniffed toward the nearby pine tree, and lifted his front paw to scrape 3 sharp marks into the bark. Not deep enough to kill the tree, but enough for a tracker to notice. A signal. Satisfied, Shadow nosed. Jack gently and began moving northwest along a barely visible game trail leading into the woods. Jack followed. They moved in silence, breaking through ferns and cold mist away from the clearing. The cabin vanished behind them. 10 minutes later, they reached a rock outcrop overlooking the river. From here, Elena could spot the signal. Jack exhaled slowly and rubbed Shadow's side. "That was too close, boy," he murmured. But the dog's eyes stayed alert, locked on the horizon. They weren't done yet. The following evening, the woods around Clearwater River were soaked in silence, save for the rustle of dry leaves brushing the forest floor and the occasional snap of brittle twigs under cautious boots. Jack Sullivan crouched behind a thicket, his breath slow and measured, eyes fixed on the dimly lit cabin across the narrow clearing. Beside him, Shadow pressed close to the earth, ears perked, nostrils twitching at the myriad of forest scents. Gasoline, antiseptic, old blood. The dog had gone silent, his canine instincts fully awakened. Jack felt the old rhythm return. Low profile, no sudden movements, trust your partner. In this case, his partner had 4 legs and a nose sharper than any tool he'd ever carried on duty. Earlier that day, Jack had transmitted exact GPS coordinates of the secret cabin to Sheriff Elena Moore. Now, as agreed, he waited for backup to arrive, but had insisted on getting close enough to observe Carter Briggs in action, ideally on camera. The faint hum of a generator buzzed from beneath the cabin. Jack raised his phone and slowly zoomed in on the cabin's only unshuttered window. Carter Briggs was moving inside. The man was exactly as his wanted poster depicted. Mid-40s wiry build hardened from life outdoors, hair pulled into a slick ponytail under a camo cap. He wore a flannel shirt layered over a thermal base, cargo pants with a fixed blade sheath, and mud-caked boots. Carter opened a trap door in the floor and descended into the hidden bunker. Jack's heart pounded. He held the phone steady, capturing every second. A few minutes passed. Carter returned carrying 2 tranquilizer guns and a heavy duffel bag. He sat both on the table and unzipped the bag. Shadow let out a quiet whine. Jack froze. In the dim light, he saw a collar with a wildlife tag, a small camera device, and zip ties. The bag also contained fresh syringes, rope, and what looked like a folded canvas trap net. There was no doubt now Carter wasn't just hiding here. He was running a poaching operation, likely moving animals to illegal buyers. Shadow suddenly rose and nudged Jack's arm. The dog's tail was rigid, ears back. A warning. Carter was moving again, this time towards the door. Jack quickly tapped his earpiece. "Elena, he's getting ready to leave. You've got maybe 2 minutes." "We're 10 seconds out," came the calm reply. From the ridge above, faint lights flickered between trees, the tactical team moving into position. Jack tucked the phone into his vest and signaled Shadow with a hand motion. The dog slunk into a crouch, ready for anything. Carter exited the cabin, holding a tranquilizer gun in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other. He scanned the forest lazily, unaware of the men and women quietly encircling him, but he paused, suddenly, sniffing the air. Then he turned sharply in Jack's direction, their eyes locked for a fraction of a second. Carter raised the gun. Jack reached for his sidearm, but Shadow was already airborne. The German Shepherd lunged with astonishing force, intercepting Carter's arm mid-swing. The gun fired its dart, harmlessly, lodging into the bark of a nearby pine. Carter stumbled backward, Shadow's jaws locked around his forearm. "Drop the weapon," Jack barked, stepping out with his badge and firearm raised. Carter flailed, but before he could react again, red-blue strobes lit up the trees as Sheriff Elena's team burst from the shadows. "Don't move!" Elena shouted. Officers tackled Carter to the ground while Shadow backed off, growling low, but obediently returning to Jack's heel with a nudge. The cabin door burst open, and officers began securing the perimeter. Inside, they found everything Jack had seen, only more. Steel cages hidden beneath camouflage netting, radio equipment linked to remote sensors, a chalkboard scrolled with animal counts and dates. In the hidden bunker, they uncovered tranquilizers, forged wildlife permits, and a ledger of illegal transactions. Even a trap camera loaded with time-stamped footage possibly capturing Nathan Pierce's final moments near the riverbank. Sheriff Elena, breathless but composed, approached Jack. "You all right?" Jack nodded, glancing down at Shadow. "He saved my life." Elena followed his gaze and offered the dog a rare smile. "We'll call that a joint arrest." Nearby, officers were carrying out sedated animals. A fox, 2 hawks, a deer with a tracking collar. One officer muttered under his breath, "Whole damn zoo in here." Elena turned back to Jack. "You got it all on video." "Every second," Jack replied, pulling out his phone. "Let's put Carter Briggs away for good this time." The autumn leaves along Clearwater River had turned from gold tourist, swirling gently in the wind like memories finally set free. Morning mist curled above the water's surface, thin as a ghost's whisper. Jack Sullivan stood at the same riverbank where everything had begun. A quiet peace finally easing the tightness in his chest. Beside him, Shadow sat attentively, tail brushing softly against the ground. The German Shepherd's fur had collected a few twigs from the forest trail, but his amber eyes remained sharp, calm, ever watchful. 3 weeks had passed since the arrest of Carter Briggs. The town of Bear Ridge had stirred with disbelief, then gratitude as the details emerged. The illegal poaching ring, the bloodied hunting blades, the falsified licenses, but it was the discovery of Nathan Pierce's watch, wallet, and torn fishing vest buried near the cabin that broke the town's collective heart. A confrontation had occurred. Briggs, cornered by Nathan while hiding the illegal kills, had reacted with violence. Nathan had tried to flee. He hadn't made it. Sheriff Elena Moore stood at the podium in the town hall that day, holding up a box containing the damning evidence. "We would not be standing here without the actions of one man and his partner. Jack Sullivan, Shadow, thank you." The crowd erupted into applause. Elena had walked down from the stage to hand Shadow a polished silver medallion stamped with the Bear Ridge Police Department crest. It read, "For bravery and service beyond duty." Shadow didn't understand the words, but he leaned gently into Jack's side as if sensing their weight. Jack knelt beside him, voice trembling. "He saved my life, and maybe more than that. He saved what was left of it, but the ceremony was only one part of a long road." Back at his cabin, the nightmares had started to fade. They still came sometimes. A shadowed alley, the scream of brakes, the echo of a gunshot, but they no longer ended with Jack waking in a cold sweat. Shadow would nudge him awake gently, not with alarm, but with understanding. Like he knew the storm had passed, and only the thunder remained. Each morning, Jack took longer walks. He fixed the loose shingles on the cabin roof, repaired the sagging porch swing, even planted a small patch of wildflowers near the back where sunlight fell through a gap in the pine canopy. For the first time in years, he cooked meals instead of heating cans. He listened to music again, old vinyl records that still crackled like distant fires. He also stayed in close touch with Elena, not just for updates, but out of a renewed sense of purpose. Jack testified in court, his statement clear and unwavering despite the courtroom's heavy silence. Briggs never looked up from the defense table. He knew what he was doing, Jack said to the judge. And Nathan died because he got in the way. The sentence was swift, life imprisonment without parole. Elena, seated behind the prosecutor, gave Jack a small nod, her expression unreadable but proud. Later, over coffee at the station, she said quietly, "You did more than solve a case. You gave this town closure. You gave Nathan's wife something solid to bury." Jack didn't respond. He just looked out the window toward the woods and whispered. It was Shadow. The local newspaper ran a feature titled, "The Cop, the Dog, and the Cabin Mystery," with a sepia-toned photo of Jack crouching beside Shadow, one hand on his partner's back, the forest stretching behind them. Kids in town had begun calling Shadow Sergeant Wolf. Someone anonymously left a bag of dog treats at Jack's cabin door every Sunday, but recognition never mattered much to Jack. What mattered was the slow, steady return of something he'd thought lost: trust, stability, the ability to sit beside a river and not feel haunted by its silence. And so one afternoon, much like the one that had begun it all, Jack picked up his fishing rod, filled a thermos with coffee, and gave Shadow a knowing glance. "Let's go see if they're biting." They walked side by side down the familiar trail, boots pressing into fallen leaves, paws silent against damp earth. When they reached the river, Jack settled on the large, smooth stone near the shallows. Shadow circled once before lying down beside him, head resting on his front paws. The line was cast. Jack let out a slow breath, watching the current drift around the rocks like time itself. His mind, once crowded with flashbacks and fractured thoughts, now held only one memory: the sound of a shadow barking beside the water's edge, the flash of blood on leather, the first ripple of a truth long buried. He turned to the dog and smiled. "We did it, buddy." Shadow thumped his tail in reply. Sometimes God sends angels not with wings, but with fur and 4 paws. Jack thought he was broken, done with the world. But through Shadow's loyalty and courage, he found healing, purpose, and justice, not just for himself but for others. This story reminds us that miracles don't always come in blinding light. Sometimes they arrive quietly in the bark of a dog, in the strength to take one more step, or in the courage to believe again. If you've ever felt lost, if you've ever prayed in silence for a sign, know that God hears you just like he heard Jack, just like he sent Shadow. Comment Amen if you believe in second chances. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more real stories that restore faith and heal hearts. And may God bless you and your family with love, protection, and peace.